Hey, what's going on, everyone? Seth Miranda here for AdoramaTV, and this is Replay Reply. This series is going to be all about jumping back into the massive library of videos we have on the Adorama platform. Adorama TV, Adorama Events, all the channels that you guys help build, and there's always been a lot of questions in the comments, so instead of answering them one for one text-wise, we're going to be doing it in this format to kind of help everybody understand some things they might not even thought about. I pulled out some videos here and I pulled out some of mine to get this going, and I just want to start this off by saying, since I do a lot of the product videos, you might want to check out some of those videos because they're not just about the product, they're about how we apply techniques to use the product. So there might be some lessons in there on lighting and shooting techniques and all sorts of stuff that you might be missing out, and there's a lot of stuff in here. So let's just start off with this really old video, the G Drive SSD Mobile. So this one is kind of an interesting one because I did like a really weird lighting technique in this one, but Aman Bakshi is asking, how do you keep up with that cable with all the movement? And I think that's a question I still get to this day. Even though that comment is 5 years old, I get tethering questions all the time because I think people are just new to tethering all the time, right? And one of the things about tethering is being aware of where your cable is so you're not ripping it out. And there are a lot of things out there on the market that you can quickly buy, throw on your camera, and help route the cable out of your way. Things that like Tether Tools has the tether block or the tether lock, which is a really nice quick release version of that lets you run your cable underneath the camera. And what I do is throw it over my shoulder. As long as that cable is over my shoulder, I know it's not in front of my feet or usually to the side of me, and I don't get tangled up in it. So it's a pretty easy way to just be aware of your surroundings. And when you're shooting, even though I'm someone that's very erratic when I shoot and I'm jumping all over the place, I'm very aware of where things are so I don't knock them down. I'm very aware of my grip, my lights, my laptop, everything. And then I know my kind of playroom that I have to jump around like you guys see me do all the time. But pretty much you're going to want to look at something that is basically a one-time buy. It'll stick with you no matter what camera you switch to, no matter what cable you'll need in the future, whatever. I've even seen people use them for HDMI cables to run just video out of a camera. So they're very useful. You might want to check that out. I'm sure there'll be links down below for that. This next one is a comment on the Nikon 105 2.8 macro and 50mm 2.8 macro. In the same video, we did that one because they both released at the same time. And John D5244 asks, Seth, how do you feel about the 50mm use in a dusty environment with the inner barrel extending and contracting? What he's referring to is when it focuses, the inside barrel actually extends outside of the lens and goes back in. And this is something I think that gets overlooked a lot by people that just hear about lenses and go, focal length, what's the aperture, and then is it sharp? There's so much more to lenses, and part of that is the actual body design. And this is why you'll see 70 to 200mm 2.8 Pro lenses looking rather large because it's internal zoom. Things like this matter. And if you're someone that just is looking more at compactability or something that is lower cost, lightweight, something like that, you might prioritize those features over something like what John's worried about, which is internal dust happening if they're in a dusty environment, which is a valid case. If you're someone that shoots macro of, let's say, flowers, and you're in a dirt road or dusty environment doing that outside, that might be a concern for you as opposed to someone else who is shooting more in a studio setting that doesn't really deal with those type of situations. So there's a lot of things to learn about lenses other than just is it sharp and a bunch of spec numbers. It's really about how you're going to be using it, where you're going to be using it, what environments it's going to be in, and what the characteristics of that lens are, both in the image you get out of it and what it's designed to do and how it's designed physically. Up next, I'm going to take a look at the Fujinon XF 18mm f1.4 video where I shot nighttime scenes out in the street with just available light sources. It actually turned out to be one of my favorite videos when we did that, and it actually was a really fun lens that I really enjoyed trying out. So go check that one out. But Nuno Oliveira 2181 asks, hi, I have a huge dilemma. I am mostly a portrait photographer and I already have in my kit a 56mm 1.2, but I can't decide whether to buy the 18mm 1.4 or the 23mm 1.4. Could you give me a suggestion to help me, please? Thank you very much. Well, this is kind of where you're going to have to decide what type of photographer and what you're trying to do. So just like we were talking about the lens having characteristics, same thing with the way you apply those characteristics. So no one's saying you can't shoot portraits with any lens. I know that there's a lot of people out there go, a portrait lens is this millimeter, a portrait lens is this aperture. It's really not that. What you have to look at is what does the lens deliver as far as a characteristic and what type of image are they going to deliver to me. You're asking between an 18mm and a 23mm, and that's on crop sensor. So if you guys are wondering what that means in like full frame terms, 18mm is around like a 27mm feel, and 23mm is around a 35mm feel. And I say feel because it's not an equivalency, it's a crop. So it gives you the field of view feel kind of those lenses in full frame. So hopefully that, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but hopefully that clears up a little bit. So you're basically asking between a wide angle lens or a slightly less wide angle lens. And what you have to ask yourself is, well, do I want to include things like more of the environment of the person when I'm shooting those portraits? Or do I want to step in close and make it feel more warped out and dynamic? Would you want to get really low and get their shoe big in the frame while you're shooting them because their style is so much a part of who they are as a portrait? And you can see this in a lot of videos, like the L'Amour Supreme portrait I did. I always pull that one out when people ask me about wide angle lenses for portraits because that's exactly what we did there, right? We showed the environment and his outfit to show exactly who he is. And in this situation with the 18mm, I was trying to show more of the environment, like you were in a situation where you were kind of meeting up with someone for the first time and having a night out. And that's kind of the vibe I wanted to get from these series of images I was creating with this lens. Now you might say, well, I want wide, but maybe a little more isolated from the environment. And that's where maybe the 23mm will help you out there. And it does sound like they're close and you're splitting hairs, but anybody who's particular about images and the way you portray people in your shots or your shots in general, and we are photographers, we're always particular after a while. I understand that you kind of have to put your foot down and go, this is the type of shots I want to create. These are the type of portraits I do. This is how I would shoot a portrait of this person to portray them. And this is the lens with the characteristics that I would apply to that situation. So I know you probably wanted to go left or right, but I'm going to tell you, you've got to decide for yourself, are you a photographer that goes left or a photographer that goes right? All right, let's jump off of glass for a little bit and talk about some lighting. You know, I'm a lighting guy, right? And this was a video I did that I was actually pretty psyched on. This is for the ProPhoto A10 speed light when it came out. And I was really into this lighting setup. I think it was a pretty cool setup, and actually got a question totally different from what this whole thing was about, which is what usually happens in these comments. Ventura 705 asks, hey, I just bought a ProPhoto A10 and for any reason stopped flashing. Everything looks just fine, but the only problem I'm having is that it's not flashing on the camera and of the camera either way, no flashing at all. Can you help me, please? Woof. Okay, so first of all, I think this is a common problem out there. I think that people don't understand that there's so many settings in a camera and types of cameras now that could affect what talks to an accessory. And when you have something mounted in the shoe of your camera to be a light, whether it is a speed light that's on the camera or a remote to trigger a light off of camera, the communication between the camera and that device is crucial. And most of the time, if not all the time, someone tells me that their flash is not firing, it's usually because they're in silent mode, which uses electronic shutter. So either you could also be in electronic shutter mode without being in a silent mode. Cameras have both these days, right? And this is kind of a mirrorless thing. The only time mirrorless cameras will actually cause a remote to fire or a strobe on camera to fire is if they are a stacked sensor. If they're not stacked or semi-stacked, which is what we're starting to see now, you're not going to have any type of communication going on to trigger that flash. It's got to be mechanical shutter, and mechanical shutter will not be there in silent modes, and mechanical shutter obviously won't be there in electronic shooting modes, which is usually a higher frame rate shooting and stuff like that. So check your camera settings and make sure you're in a proper setting for that camera to properly communicate to the device that's inside that shoe to relay a strobe to fire. And to round this one up, let's talk about the Explore 300 video I did forever ago. And I thought I was going to pull out a lighting question, but here we are back to glass with lens questions. Did you just click headshots with a wide angle? Asks Javit Soybam. I hope I said your name right. I apologize if I didn't. Yeah, I probably did shoots with a wide angle lens. And you know why? Because I felt that it was as much of the shot as she was, because I just wanted to show the environment. It was clearly a curated setup. It wasn't like a candid portrait. She is in this environment. I wanted to see the daylight coming through. I wanted it to not feel so sterile or vapid or empty. And you know, when you're shooting a wide angle lens, you're kind of making that decision, like I said earlier, to include more of the environment, as opposed to when people say a portrait lens is a longer telephoto length and a shallower aperture, because what they're basically saying is it's meant to separate your subject from the environment so they're more isolated, so you are more focused and centered on the person themselves, which is what people tend to believe portraits are. And portraits are up to your interpretation, because it's you, the photographer, creating an image that portrays the person you are photographing to create their portrait. Crazy idea, right? In this situation with Val, yeah, I wanted to shoot a little wide. And one of the reasons I like shooting wide angle with Val in particular is the shape of her face, and she has high cheek points and these really beautiful big eyes. And when you have a wider angle lens, I was probably shooting somewhere between 24 to 40 millimeter in this video, leaning in there a little bit closer and exaggerating that shape of her face and really giving her that, like, I don't know, that angelic feel. I don't know how else to put it. She's a really fun person, and I wanted to give that vibe, that you have these big bright eyes to just jump into and get to know who Val is just from the image. And that, I felt, was achieved by having the wider angle lens, also including those shears and the daylight coming through, making it all nice and light feeling, you know? So yeah, I did shoot with a wide angle lens. Would you call these headshots? Well, you have to figure out what a headshot is for your client. If it's a headshot for an actor, it's got to look like them, so that when they walk in that room, they get that audition, rather than trying to be something that the people who are hiring people to be actors or whatever talent don't look at an image and go, oh, you don't match. No, they have to look like that image. So, or if it was something like a dentist for LinkedIn, probably wouldn't shoot it wide angle, right? You want to shoot a little more clinical looking, no pun intended there, but they're doing it for professional reasons, just so people know who they're going to go meet when they go make an appointment with them for their profession or practice, or whatever you want to call it. So you have to kind of choose your battle here. You gotta kind of figure out what is the end result image you're going to create. In the end, it's about intent. You have to walk into your shots with intent. You have to understand what you're trying to say. Every decision you make in a frame is like a word in a sentence, and it's got to be coherent, because you're not going to be next to those images to talk about them. No one's reading your captions on social, except maybe your mom. And you've got to let that image stand for itself and coherently relay what you're trying to say. And that's all with the decisions we make to get to that end result, and that includes lens choice and everything else as far as your style. And style is one of the hardest things to come to fruition with, or solidify for yourself in this craft, in this industry, in general, for any creative, because you're literally like I said, putting your foot down and saying, no, this is my point of view. No, this is how I would go about this. This is my style. This is my part of this image reflected in this image. It's tough, I know, and it takes a long time to develop, and sometimes you just want to go, you know what, I've been doing this style for too long, let me head this way and make a complete different turn and go down another alleyway, and that's when things get really exciting, in my opinion. So I urge you guys to keep shooting, try to find out what in your images you do like, what in your portraits you think was successful, and keep working towards that and moving in that direction till you feel like, nope, let me try something different. Anyway, I hope this was helpful for you guys. We're going to keep going on with this series, so please jump around the channel, drop some questions. I'm going to try to pull them out wherever I can. Of course, all bets are off. It doesn't matter how old the video is. If you have something out there that you've been wanting an answer to, or there's a technique inside of a video that you have a really microcosm of a question about, hit me with a comment in that video and let me know down below how you guys think about this series. We're just starting it out and want to give it a shot. So if you guys want to check me out, I am Last X Witness on all social. Don't forget to subscribe on this channel. Hit the bell so you get notified when we put up more videos like this. Hit like. It really helps out the video and this channel. If you learned anything from Adorama over the years, we'd appreciate it. Whew. We'll see you next time. See you in those comments.